22 hours, Al Udeid Air Base, Qatar. The pre-dawn sky holds its breath over the largest U.S. air operations hub in the Middle East. Then the first C-17 Globemaster III begins its taxi toward the runway. Not for a routine supply run, but for evacuation. The pattern becomes clear within 90 minutes. At Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates, ground crews dismantle communications arrays at triple normal speed. At Al Tanf Garrison in southeastern Syria, 200 American troops receive 12-hour extraction orders. At forward operating bases scattered across Iraq, Kuwait, and Jordan, the same encrypted directive cascades through command channels. Execute retrograde operations, priority alpha. This is not withdrawal. This is battlefield preparation. Intelligence analysts at U.S. Central Command Headquarters in Tampa detect the signature immediately. When forward elements pull back while strategic assets move forward, the calculus is unmistakable. Satellite imagery confirms what ground reports suggest: the United States is clearing the blast radius. At 06:15 hours, the US Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group alters course. The nuclear-powered supercarrier, which has maintained station in the Gulf of Oman for 14 consecutive weeks, pushes northeast at 28 knots. Her escorts, 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and 1 Ticonderoga-class cruiser, form an anti-access screen 40 nautical miles wide. Their AN-SPY-1D radar arrays sweep Iranian airspace in continuous rotation. The message requires no diplomatic translation, approach radius established, engagement protocols active. The troop movements follow a pattern burned into Pentagon doctrine since Operation Desert Storm. Reduce personnel exposure at vulnerable fixed installations. Concentrate firepower on mobile survivable platforms. Establish sanctuary zones for non-combatant evacuation. The sequence has preceded every major strike operation for 3 decades. Defense officials in Washington offer carefully neutral statements about force posture optimization and routine rotations. The timeline contradicts them. Routine rotations do not compress 6-week procedures into 72-hour windows. At Al-Assad Air Base in western Iraq, maintenance crews drain fuel from ground vehicles and prepare them for strategic airlift. The base, which absorbed Iranian ballistic missile strikes in January 2020, knows this choreography. Personnel deemed non-essential for combat operations, administrative staff, construction engineers, logistics coordinators, board outbound transports in alphabetical order. Essential warfighters remain: combat air controllers, special operations liaisons, intelligence fusion analysts. The base sheds weight while sharpening its edge. At 09:40 hours, the pattern extends to diplomatic channels. The U.S. Embassy in Baghdad instructs all non-emergency personnel to depart Iraq within 48 hours. Similar directives issue from the embassies in Kuwait City and Amman. Consular services suspend. Visa processing halts. The State Department elevates travel advisories to level 4, do not travel. These measures do not accompany negotiations. They accompany strikes. Iranian intelligence networks detect the movement within hours. At Qatam Al-Anbiya Air Defense Headquarters in Tehran, analysts overlay the base evacuations with naval repositioning data. The correlation is exact. Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders convene emergency sessions. Their assessment aligns with American intentions. The window is closing. Supreme Leader directives filter through command echelons. Disperse mobile assets. Activate concealed launch sites. Prepare retaliatory options. Both sides now operate on mirrored assumptions of imminent conflict. The strategic repositioning accelerates through the afternoon. At 14:20 hours, a formation of 6 B-52H Stratofortress bombers departs Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota. Their flight path arcs across the Atlantic toward Diego Garcia, the isolated U.S. naval base in the Indian Ocean. Each bomber carries 70,000 pounds of ordnance capacity. Each can loiter over target areas for 12 hours without refueling. Their deployment compresses normal timelines by 60%. They will arrive in theater within 36 hours. Not next week, not for deterrence, but for execution. Submarine activity confirms the escalation. The Florida, a guided missile submarine converted from ballistic missile configuration, surfaces briefly off the coast of Oman before submerging into pre-planned patrol zones. Her 154 Tomahawk cruise missiles represent more strike capacity than most nations possess in their entire arsenals. She does not surface for resupply. She surfaces to transmit a message. Positioning complete, strike packages loaded, awaiting authorization. At 18:05 hours, U.S. Special Operations Command elements in northeastern Syria begin their own retrograde. Delta Force and SEAL team operators who have spent months hunting Islamic State remnants receive extraction coordinates. MH-47 Chinook helicopters infiltrate at low altitude, landing at dirt strip coordinates changed hourly to avoid targeting. The commandos carry hard drives and detainees, intelligence assets too valuable to risk in expanded conflict. Within 4 hours, the last American Special Operations footprint in eastern Syria dissolves into the night sky. The regional impact cascades through Allied networks. Israeli Defense Forces elevate alert status to level 3, activating reserve Iron Dome batteries along the northern border. Saudi Arabia quietly relocates F-15SA strike fighters from Prince Sultan Air Base to hardened shelters at Tabuk. The United Arab Emirates suspends commercial flights through its airspace for maintenance windows that coincide suspiciously with bomber transit corridors. None of these nations confirm coordination with U.S. operations. None need to. Their actions synchronize without formal announcements. At 22:30 hours, the Pentagon's force management level data shows a 40% reduction in personnel at vulnerable Middle Eastern installations compared to 72 hours prior. Approximately 3,200 troops have relocated from fixed bases to naval platforms, hardened facilities, or returned flights to Germany and the continental United States. The reduction does not weaken striking power. Precision-guided munitions launched from ships and aircraft require fewer personnel than occupation forces require. The U.S. military has not retreated. It has transformed from occupier to striker. Iranian state media begins broadcasting defiant rhetoric at 23:00 hours. Graphics display burning American flags and computer-generated simulations of missile swarms overwhelming Patriot batteries. The propaganda serves dual purposes: rally domestic morale and probe American resolve through information warfare. U.S. Central Command does not respond through press channels. The response manifests through continued asset positioning. An additional Arleigh Burke-class destroyer transits the Strait of Hormuz at midnight, her Aegis combat system radiating active sensor emissions across every Iranian coastal radar station. The electronic signal carries more weight than any diplomatic statement. Intelligence indicators multiply through the early morning hours of the second day. Satellite reconnaissance detects Iranian road mobile ballistic missile launchers departing garrison facilities and dispersing into mountainous terrain. The Shahid Bagheri aerospace complex near Tehran increases electromagnetic emissions consistent with missile fueling operations. Naval infantry units of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps conduct embarkation drills at Bandar Abbas port. Preparation for potential Strait of Hormuz closure attempts. Each Iranian action mirrors American repositioning. Both militaries now operate under the assumption that conflict is not potential but imminent. The strategic calculus becomes transparent through force geometry. The United States has withdrawn personnel vulnerable to ballistic missile strikes while concentrating anti-access capabilities on mobile naval platforms. Iran has dispersed assets vulnerable to airstrikes while preparing retaliatory options against shipping and regional allies. The configuration is classical pre-war posturing, reduce vulnerabilities, maximize striking options, compress decision timelines. History records this pattern before Operation El Dorado Canyon in 1986, Operation Desert Fox in 1998, and Operation Odyssey Dawn in 2011. The signature precedes kinetic action by days, not weeks. At 03:15 hours on the third day, Air Force KC-135 Stratotanker refueling aircraft establish orbiting tracks over Iraq and the northern Arabian Sea. Their positioning creates aerial refueling corridors capable of supporting sustained strike operations deep into Iranian territory. Fighter aircraft can now reach targets 800 nautical miles inland and return without landing. The tankers do not deploy for exercises. They deploy to eliminate range as a limiting factor. Defense analysts tracking open-source data identify additional indicators. Commercial satellite imagery shows unusual activity at ammunition storage facilities on Diego Garcia. Ordnance handling vehicles move between bunkers and the airfield at intervals consistent with bomb loading operations. Publicly available flight tracking data before military aircraft disable their transponders shows a concentration of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platforms orbiting just outside Iranian airspace. RQ-135 rivet joint signals intelligence aircraft, E-8 joint stars ground surveillance aircraft, and RQ-4 Global Hawk drones map electronic order of battle and mobile target locations. This is not monitoring. This is targeting preparation. The diplomatic silence becomes its own signal. No emergency UN Security Council sessions convene. No last-minute envoy shuttles between Washington and Tehran. The absence of diplomacy indicates that decision windows have closed. When nations believe negotiation remains possible, they negotiate. When they have committed to military action, they withdraw diplomats and issue travel warnings. The current pattern matches the latter category. By 12:00 hours on the third day, the troop repositioning nears completion. Remaining American personnel at forward bases consist almost entirely of combat essential specialties, air defense crews, combat air controllers, quick reaction forces. The support infrastructure has dissolved. What remains is a skeleton force optimized for two missions: defend against Iranian retaliation and facilitate strike operations. Every unnecessary person has been removed from the blast radius. The question is no longer whether the United States will strike, but when the authorization will transmit, and what the target set includes. The force positioning indicates a strike package designed to degrade Iranian nuclear infrastructure, ballistic missile facilities, and Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps command nodes. The scale suggests more than symbolic retaliation. This is strategic degradation. The timeline suggests authorization could come within 72 to 96 hours, though operational security ensures that only a handful of individuals know the actual H hour. Regional allies now face their own calculations. Nations hosting U.S. forces become potential targets for Iranian retaliation. Iraq, with its fragile government balance between American and Iranian influence, faces the starkest dilemma. Any U.S. strike launched from Iraqi territory could trigger domestic political collapse and militia attacks on remaining American personnel. Kuwait and Qatar have survived this calculus before, but each escalation cycle tests their willingness to accept risk. The United Arab Emirates and Bahrain possess more robust air defenses but smaller margins for error. Each nation watches the bomber deployments and troop withdrawals and understands The decision has been made above their level of influence. The strategic implications extend beyond immediate military effects. A major U.S. strike on Iranian territory will shatter the fragile status quo that has governed the region since the 2020 Soleimani assassination. Iran will retaliate, not with restraint, but with the full spectrum of asymmetric capabilities. Proxy militias in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen will activate. Commercial shipping in the Persian Gulf will face attack. Cyber operations against critical infrastructure will intensify. The Middle East will not return to its previous equilibrium. It will escalate to a new, more dangerous baseline. Yet the United States has accepted this calculus. The troop withdrawals and asset repositioning indicate that decision makers have concluded that the cost of striking now is lower than the cost of allowing Iranian capabilities to mature further. Whether that calculation proves correct will depend on variables no intelligence assessment can predict with certainty: the accuracy of targeting data, the effectiveness of Iranian air defenses, the speed of retaliatory responses, and the discipline of both sides to manage escalation. At 1947 hours on the third day, the Dwight D. Eisenhower reaches her designated strike launch position 180 nautical miles off the Iranian coast. Her FA-18E Super Hornets sit on deck catapults, loaded with AGM-154 joint standoff weapons and AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missiles. The B-52 bombers at Diego Garcia complete final mission briefs. The guided missile submarines lurk in patrol boxes with updated target coordinates. The force is set. The repositioning is complete. What began 72 hours ago as seemingly routine movements has compressed into a coiled strike mechanism awaiting only the final authorization. The strait remains tense not through miscalculation but through calculated precision. Both sides have moved beyond posturing into operational readiness. The next 96 hours will determine whether this remains a crisis or becomes a conflict. The forces are in position. The decision is no longer with field commanders. It rests with national leadership in Washington and Tehran, and the countdown has already begun.